Hi, I'm Dan Poblocki. You are listening to Our First Fears, a podcast about gateway horror, past and present, with artists working in the genre today. Long before James Wan introduced a global audience to a supposedly possessed doll named Annabelle in his 2013 film The Conjuring, I'd heard about her from a friend who had met her caretakers, a pair of ghost hunters in Connecticut named Ed and Lorraine Warren. Of course, I had to look up Annabelle immediately, and I was surprised to find photos of an inconspicuous-looking Raggedy Ann doll with red yarn hair and glossy black eyes stitched onto a pale fabric face, a red triangle for a nose, and a cutesy upturned smile. She didn't look dangerous or evil, or capable of hurting people, but that was what made the idea that she was haunted even creepier. And creepier yet, in the photos I saw online, she sat in a small glass case with a warning sign posted next to her to keep away. These are images that hint at a complete story using only a few telling details. As storytellers, Annabelle's caretakers, the Warrens, knew exactly what they were doing by setting up the doll in this way. And it points toward their brand of genius. What horror fan can resist a creepy doll? We need to know more. Well, lucky you, because author Lorien Lawrence is here today to talk with me about the Warrens, who were made uber famous in Wan's film version of their lives by the actors who played them, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. Like Annabelle, Patrick and Vera, Ed and Lorraine also don't look dangerous, evil, or capable of hurting people. But, as Lorien and I discuss, looks can be deceiving. Allegedly. Lorien should know, as her life has twined around the Warrenses in strange and intriguing ways. Lorien Lawrence is the author of the Frightwatch series for middle grade readers, including the novels The Stitchers, The Collectors, and Unmasked. Her new one, The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, is available now. And by the way, I just have to read here what Stephen King had to say about The Stitchers. He says, and I quote, "I finished The Stitchers today, and what a cool and wild ride it was. This is the perfect book for kids to cool off with on a hot day because the chills come guaranteed. I loved the scares, but the heart of the story is the tough but tender partnership between Quinn and Mike. They are brave, resourceful, and just a little bit attracted to each other. I hope they'll be back. If they are, I will be there. So will about 1 million kids, I bet. Kudos to Lorien Lawrence." Yeah, Stephen King gives Lorien a glowing recommendation, and I hope you take it. Lorien lives in Monroe, Connecticut, with her family, where Ed and Lorraine Warren lived once too, not more than a mile from the basement museum where Annabelle the doll resides in her little glass prison. But we'll get into all of that shortly. For now, turn down the lights, turn up the volume, and get ready to explore Our First Fears. Hello, Lorien. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for joining me and for taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm excited.
So I am very, very excited to talk to you today about Our First Fears, and especially this topic, which I'm sure we both will have a lot to say.
For sure.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
So thank you for choosing them. I have a lot of memories going back pretty far about the Warrens. To start, I ask all of my guests 2 questions. And the first one is, can you tell us about yourself, your work, and your relationship to the horror genre?
Sure. Okay. Well, I feel like I was always meant to write books because my name came from a book, which is funny because your last guest was named Sam.
Sam Rebline, yep.
And has a dog named Frodo. And my name is Lorien, and it is from The Lord of the Rings. My dad was this like very sweet, nerdy engineer who was just like always reading history books. That's kind of what he read for fun. But he was taking these really hard math classes when he was doing engineering in the 70s. And I guess just needed a brain break and read The Lord of the Rings and fell in love with that whole fantasy story and just kind of held on to the name Lorien for when I was born. So I always kind of joke that I was always meant to have something to do with books. And literally my whole life is books because I'm also a 7th grade English teacher.
Yes.
Lot of energy. Maybe that's why I'm always have a lot of energy because I have to kind of match the energy of the middle, the 7th graders.
Yes.
Who can be feral at times, but
I've met a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And when they're in groups, they
it's
can be feral.
Mentality at its finest, and then just the insecurities and the weeping, the tears, the weeping in the bathroom, the tears, the taking each other's shoes. It's just like it's like so many big feelings. I think that's why I love it and why I kind of gravitated towards that age group. So I do genuinely
as a teacher,
love it.
But
as
also
a teacher.
As a writer so far.
Yes, correct. And I like how you added so far. So I also write for middle grade, which I kind of fell into. So I've always known that I've wanted to be an author, like since I learned that it was a thing that you could do. So kindergarten. I had the most wonderful kindergarten teacher, just like chef's kiss of a kindergarten teacher, like genuinely got all of us to be excited to be there and love learning and felt valued. And her name was Miss Shapani. I remember that name because it's kind of a silly name. And she had like stations.
But a perfect kindergarten teacher name.
Perfect kindergarten teacher name. And this was like late 80s, I guess I was in kindergarten. And you know, she had the full, like the necklaces that pertain to different holidays made of wood and sweater vests and all of that. But she had a writing station and we didn't know how to write yet. So except, you know, like our name or whatever. But she had I remember this big pencil like on the wall and there was a desk. And in kindergarten, there were like really weren't desks. It was tables and carpets and whatever. And so this felt like the grown-up space. And it was the writing station. And whenever we had station time, you could choose where you went. And I always went to that station. And you got to just like, there was just paper and a pencil. And you got to just kind of scribble, scrabble, write your stories. And then draw the picture that went with it. And she would then sit next to you and underneath your scribbles, write what your words would be. And immediately I was just
I love this.
Yeah. And it was like, it felt so validating, you know, to a 5-year-old that it's like who physically can't write yet and like doesn't really know how a story works or functions. You just know what you think is fun. And she just kind of really encouraged the fun part, like and validated all of our silly, ridiculous little stories. And as soon as she kind of told us like this is something you could do, like this is someone's job. Oh my God, I want to do that. So then I would go to the bookstore. From that point till I was trying to get published in my 20s, I would go to the bookstores. And I don't know, Dan, if you ever did this, but I would go and find where my name would be, like in the bookstore, like the place where my name would be.
Yes.
And, right? And
yep.
like, I like don't think I'll ever take that for granted. Going to a bookstore and finding your book and seeing it there on the shelf is just, I never want to get jaded by that because I just remember always going and like moving the books and finding where I would fit.
And seeing who would be on either side of you, like who are your shelf neighbors in a bookstore, which is always fun.
It was always fun. And mine was always, I mean, I guess it depends, but I feel like it was the author of A Wrinkle in Time, and I can never remember her name, but like you would think I would know it. Yeah. I don't love fantasy though. So even though I was named for Lord of the Rings and I'm always next to her in the bookstore, which is, you know, lovely, it's not my genre. I feel like I found horror when I was really fourth and fifth grade. Mm-hmm. Again, I know I'm a teacher, and teachers get such a bad rep, especially lately, that I'm just going to say nice things about teachers and how they were really the ones to kind of help me find my place as a future teacher and as an author. And in fourth and fifth grade, my teachers had amazing classroom libraries and so much horror. Literally, one had a cabinet full of just R.L. Stine books, just Fear Street. And I was the librarian assistant, not to brag, but I was in charge. Me and another girl were in charge of like signing the books out to students and checking them back in. And we felt very cool and special doing that nerdy task. But so I got to look at all the covers all the time and like see the ones that when my fellow student classmates would bring them back to check them back in, like if they were gushing about a book, like, oh my gosh, this one scared me so bad. Like it started conversations. And so then I would check those books out and I would have nightmares constantly. Like there was a period where I just kept trying to go sleep in my brother's room and he was like, get out. But I like couldn't stop reading them, and I just kind of fell in love with genre fiction. I feel like it was a really good time to grow up for horror. You know, cut into middle school, my best friend and I snuck into Scream, you know, the OG one, and sat in the front row because we had to wait for the ushers to go away and for everyone to go in because we bought tickets to a different movie and had to wait in the bathroom. So then by the time we snuck in, we were first row and like staring up.
This is badass behavior. I approve.
Which is wild because both of us were such goody goodies. I mean, I was a librarian assistant, like such nerdy children. But yeah, it was like something.
Well, horror makes us do bad things. You know,
makes you a little bit naughty.
I'm kidding when I say that. Of course it doesn't. But, you know, when you love something, you will do something for it. You will do something to watch that first Scream movie in the theater.
And I have zero regrets.
Good. But, you know, in terms of your work, tell the listeners about the books you've written, or at least a list of the books you've written and what you have coming out.
I have written, so what's out as of today is the Frightwatch series, which has The Stitchers, which was the first book, The Collectors, which was the second, and Unmasked, which is the third, and it's also like a companion. In the first two books, it's about two seventh graders, like towards the end of seventh grade, Quinn and Mike, who are on the track team, and they start to suspect that something really weird is up with their neighbors, who they call the oldies, because they don't seem to age, but like one day the oldies will be limping and looking all raggedy, and then the next day they'll be pristine and plastic and sprinting down the street. And Quinn is thinking it's something paranormal or supernatural, and Mike is very like science-minded, kind of like a X-Files dynamic. They kind of like team up and start to investigate and figure out what the oldies are in the first book, and then the ladies in white, which is a ghost story, in the second book. And then the third book is kind of different. Quinn and Mike are in it, but they're not minor characters, but it's not through Quinn's point of view. It's through Marion's point of view. And this was like my monster book. I was always obsessed with special effects growing up. I saw the making of Thriller, the music video, when I was like a kid. It was on VH1 or something around Halloween. And I remember watching it and just being completely transfixed by Rick Baker and like how he did, you know, the American Werewolf in London makeup and all of that, and like how much went into it, because I had never known. And so then I watched Face Off. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was on the Sci-Fi Channel for a while. Now it's on Netflix.
Yes.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is bananas. It's so much science. It's so much art. It's just so creative. Yeah. It's like the most creative thing I've ever seen. And I wanted to write a book about a middle schooler who had aspirations to do that and has like a workshop out of her basement. And so she makes this monster mask that then ends up possessing her crush at the school dance. And
nice.
Those are out right now, the Frightwatch series. And then I have the Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, which is not part of the series, but it comes out in a couple of weeks on March 18th. I don't know when this airs, but the book comes out March 18th.
I want to talk about the Many Hauntings of the Manning Family a little bit later on.
Yes.
Because I finished reading it, and thought it was awesome. I texted you
Thank
early
you.
on when I was reading it and told you how much I loved it and was loving it. And I just think it's the readers are going to have the same sort of reaction that I did.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm psyched for it. The second question I have for you is, do you recall the first time you ever felt frightened?
I remember the first time I've been frightened by a book. So I think that's what I'm going to talk about, because I honestly can't remember the first time I felt frightened in just life, because I don't know, I have such a vivid imagination. Like, I remember at one point being convinced my parents were vampires, and just because I was reading a book about someone whose parents are vampires, and I was like, Dad, smile. And then he smiled with his mouth closed, and I was like, oh, he's hiding his teeth. So I'm sure I've been scared of like a million things at a million times, but I do have a distinct memory of being read from the book Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark in my kindergarten class.
Whoa.
I know. So we had this lovely librarian, like sweetest person, loved his job so much, like was so, like, he was lovely. He had this like curly mullet and these giant, 80s glasses, and the library was in the basement. So there were like no windows or anything. It always smelled a little bit musty. And I remember like it was around Halloween. So we were baby kindergartners, because, it's like you're barely in kindergarten in October. And he had said that we could bring our, teddy bears to school, like for library time. So we all had our teddy bears and we were sitting on the carpet. And he's like, I'm going to read you some scary stories today. And we were all excited. And then he whips out Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the first one. And he's doing like typical story time where, if you remember like elementary school teachers, like they show you in slow motion the pages and like the illustrations, and that are bananas. And so he did not read like the scariest of scary ones. And then he also read, which is not in that book, The Green Ribbon.
Mm-hmm.
But again, 5-year-olds. And so we were just clutching our teddy bears, frozen, just like eyes wide, mouths to the floor, just like, oh my gosh. And he was just as chipper as could be. But in that moment, like, we were all terrified, but like we all wanted to sign that book out. Like, as soon as he was done reading it, we were like fighting to get that book. And I remember being genuinely freaked out by some of those stories and having some bad dreams, but then also being like really intrigued by it because of like how energetic the room got, that like electric buzz feeling. And that has always kind of stuck with me. So that is absolutely the first time I remember being truly scared of a story and liking the feeling.
That's great. I mean, and I love that it is a book related thing, a book related thing and an educational thing, because you are a writer and you are a teacher, and those are some really scary stories. Mm-hmm. And I love that it didn't totally turn you off to scary books. In fact, the opposite. Here you are today, I'm wondering more of the effect of the topic that you brought to the conversation today, how these people had an effect on you and your childhood, your youth, your view of scary stories, and possibly how these people inspired you. And who I'm talking about are the famous, and some would say infamous, Ed and Lorraine Warren, the ghost hunters / demonologists / clairvoyants from Bridgeport or Monroe, Connecticut. So just to give a brief rundown, and I'm going to keep this very brief, Ed Warren was born Edward Warren Miney on September 7th, 1926. He passed away August 23rd, 2006. Born in Bridgeport, died in Monroe, Connecticut at age 79. And Lorraine was born Lorraine Rita Moran, born January 31st, 1927. And she passed away April 18th, 2019, at age 92. They met in early 1940s while Ed was working at a theater called the Colonial Theater in Bridgeport. I sort of pointedly said theater because Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, your new book, is set in a theater. Mm-hmm. So I think it's funny that they met in a theater. They married in 1945, and they had their daughter, Judy, now Judy Spera, on January 11th, 1946. So they were artists in addition to having several other jobs, and they worked in landscape art. I don't know if you heard this.
I have, and that's how he got people to let him in the house, right?
Well, they would sketch houses from across the street. Lorraine or Ed would sketch, and, you know, maybe she would choose based on thinking the house was haunted. Then they'd bring the sketch over to the house and knock on the door and be like, I just sketched your house. It's haunted. And then Ed would somehow convince the people to allow him to paint the house for them. I just think that that's a funny way to sort of enter into the ghost hunting business by sort of cajoling people into telling them their house is haunted and do you want artwork painted of it. The last couple things I have to say just before we get into our own stories of the Warrens and ghost hunting ideas in general is in 1952, the pair founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, which is also known as NESPR, if that's how you say it, which still exists today. Their website seems to be mostly promotion for the Warrens. You know, this is something that they created for themselves, I think probably to lend some sense of legitimacy to the work that they wanted to do and the money that they believed that they could make from this. So, we all know the Warrens if you're familiar with the films of the Conjuring universe. First two directed by James Wan, and he went on to continue producing these with story credits and such, very loosely based around their lives. Very Hollywood version of what actually happened. But I guess my question for you next is, why did you pick this topic to bring to the podcast? And also, what is your connection to the Warrens?
I feel like if you live in Connecticut, you have at least a mild obsession with this family and this lore. And I just feel like if you get a person from Connecticut in a room with another person from Connecticut who like has any sort of interest in this stuff, then we will just talk about it. Case in point, at Storyfest, I think it was the 2023 one, where like you
at the Westport Library.
Yes, at the Westport Library, and you and I just like, I don't even remember how it came up, but you and I just started talking about it and obsessing over it, and then anyone who was around us was kind of adding to the conversation. And I remember Alex, who was the librarian, was walking by, and he just randomly started to say, "Oh yeah, I paid $200 to get a picture with Annabelle." Like it's just one of those things that like it feels very homey, even though it's wild. I grew up in Stratford, so I didn't always live in Monroe, but I live in Monroe now, not very far from where their house is. And my mom's best friend, who is my godmother.
Hold up.
Yeah?
I did not know that.
Oh, really?
I did not know you were in Monroe.
Are you serious? No. I'm like a mile away.
Oh my God.
How did I not tell you that at Storyfest? Yeah.
My brain is a sieve, so, you know, you probably did.
Yeah, I'm real close to that creepy basement. The first kind of stories I would hear came from my parents because, I mean, they would talk about certain things, and Raggedy Ann dolls were like a big deal in the 80s, and my mom would like never let me, like they had a TV show, the books were everywhere, the dolls were everywhere. A lot of my friends had Raggedy Ann dolls, and for your younger audience, Raggedy Ann dolls are little rag dolls that had bright red hair and like kind of soulless black eyes. They were creepy, to be fair, and that is what the actual Annabelle doll is, not like that porcelain one that they have in the movies. And so my mom never let me have a Raggedy Ann doll, and she was always very open about it. She's like, "Nope, those are haunted. Nope."
Because of Annabelle.
Yes, because of hearing stories that in the Warrens' basement, they had this museum of their haunted, cursed objects. And in a case, everyone in my family would tell this story. My grandparents would talk about it. They had this glass case where the Raggedy Ann doll was like chained up inside with a note. I can't remember what they said the note said, but I'm sure you could find a picture online.
Warning, positively do not open.
Yes. Yet they take Annabelle all over the, like on tour essentially, but I'm sure we'll get to that. So I always heard these stories, and then the urban legend would go further. It was like, oh yeah, these teenagers went and they were like mocking the doll and making fun of it, because it used to actually be open as a museum until the town shut it down and were like, you're not actually a museum, you cannot charge people to come into your home. And so like, you know, and then someone got into a car accident right after they mocked the doll, and my godmother dated one of their assistants. And so whenever my mom would say, like, they would go out to dinner together. He would tell all these wild stories about going on haunts with them and exorcisms and all of this stuff. And my mom's like, as he's talking, the hair would be like up on my arm. And he one night was telling her about like finding a man who was a werewolf and just like wild things. My mom also worked, she was an x-ray technician before she retired, and she worked at Bridgeport Hospital for a while, which is in Connecticut, and it's right by Lindley Street, which had an incident that the Warrens were involved in, where there was an alleged possession situation of a girl. And my mom had to x-ray like the firemen and the policemen who came in, who had like gotten hit with objects that had been going all over the house. So I grew up hearing these stories, and I'm sure we'll get into it. I still don't believe them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I believe that these people believe that they were the subject of these incidents, but I personally don't believe any of them. And I met Lorraine Warren when I was 16. I was a waitress at a country club, and I was not a good waitress. I got a little better as time went on, but I was like, I'm pretty klutzy. So like, I've dropped a wedding cake before. Like I'm just,
oh my God.
Yeah. I was like quite tiny in high school, and they like had me carry like, you know, little Lorien carry this giant wedding cake off the dance floor, and I literally like dropped it. So I was just like, why don't give me important jobs? Like, give me the family no one cares about in the back. I don't even know why, but there was an event with Lorraine Warren where she was doing like a presentation with a slideshow, and she legit was like dressed like an old lady version of Wednesday Addams, like Wednesday Addams 40 years later. And I got assigned to her table, and I was just like, she's like the main person here. Like, I know it's not the bride, it's not that kind of event, but like, I don't think I should be serving her. And so I did get assigned her table, and the slideshow was like playing, and I kept like sneaking around to, you know, watch it, and it was just blobs of like light. But there was something about her that creeped me out. Not her slideshow and not her stories, because I was kind of like, I really want to believe in this. I just like can't get my little skeptic brain to be like, that blob of light is a spirit, right? But like, something about her, she was so intense, right? Like, she's at this just a dinner where everybody is like excited to be there. Again, you know, like same with the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where there was this buzz and this electricity. The whole room was buzzing. Like, everybody was excited to be there because, you know, they thought they were going to get this really, and they were all into it. Like, everyone else was watching this slideshow and buying into every single thing, and they were getting scared, and people were talking about it. And there was a lot of really fun energy in the room. But anytime I had to go interact with her and like go to her table, it was just such intensity that she freaked me out a little bit, to the point where I'm sure I was being a 16-year-old idiot, where I was going over, because in my head I'm like, I don't believe it, but please don't read my mind. So like in my head, like nervous that like, because she was just so intense, it just always felt like she was staring straight through me when I went over, like never smiled at me. It just felt really intense, that it kind of freaked me out a little bit.
I've heard that she's a pleasant person, but you know, in interviews and from media stuff, but I think that the two of them are media pros and pros at manipulating the media. So it's really interesting to hear you say that from your perspective as somebody who was, you know, waiting on her or helping her in some way, that she's giving you nothing.
Maybe, it could have been a bad night. Who knows?
Yeah,
but to give her the benefit, but it was so intense that I was just like, what is happening here?
Well, I can imagine she seems like an intense person from the appearances I've seen of her on certain ghost hunting television shows, and the sort of certainty that she carries about with her. I think that idea of the two of them granting themselves such authority
Yes.
in places that maybe that authority wasn't even being asked for. I think there's something about that personality type that as a kid, as a teenager, you're not understanding and you're not sort of reading. And also the fact that you knew growing up that there were scary things happening all around this person. Yeah, that makes sense. My first experience hearing of the Warrens was when I was in college. I was dating somebody who lived in Milford, Connecticut.
Oh.
And I don't know how close by that is
It's not far. It's like 20 minutes.
Well, there you go. Well, this guy, knew that I was into ghost stories, or that I had grown up in a house that my family believed was haunted in New Jersey. And he was like, well, there's this very famous couple who lives around here who gives ghost tours and talks about hauntings and how to hunt for ghosts using your camera. And he showed me this picture that either he had bought from them from a gift shop or that he had taken himself. And it was a landscape, a house in the distance, a field, and a kind of smoky mist that was in the foreground. And in the mist was this dark-eyed, sort of grinning face. And it was terrifying.
There was like an actual face?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
he's better than them then, because all her pictures were literally just orbs of light. No faces.
Well, I don't know if he took it or if he bought it from them. What I remember seeing was a glossy, like, film photo, pre-digital anything. This was the mid-90s. And it scared me. It made me immediately fascinated to learn more about these people. And as the years went by and I sort of heard more about them, that they were involved in the Amityville haunting or the investigation or the hoax of that all, I learned that they were part of another investigation of a family who believed they were being haunted in, I don't know, the 80s. 70s or 80s in Pennsylvania, called the Smurl family. And I do believe the next Conjuring movie that is coming out later this year is based on the Smurl haunting. But there was a 1991 movie based on a book that they co-wrote with an author named Robert Curran called The Haunted. The book was called The Haunted. The TV movie was called The Haunted. It starred Sally Kirkland as Mrs. Smurl. And what she and her family went through dealing with a succubus who was possibly tormenting her husband, her poor husband.
Oh, it's always the poor husband, isn't it? They just can't help themselves.
But there were moments in this television movie that, I was 13 or 14 years old in 1991, and this movie scared the crap out of me. There are things that I still think to myself, quotes from this movie that I still remember as like, oh, this movie messed me up. So if the new Conjuring movie that comes out this fall is anything like that, I'm
not. I bet you it won't be, because they want the teen, like our middle school type of audience. So I don't think they'll go that hard. I feel like there were less rules in the 90s.
Well, the funny thing was, it wasn't even the things that were going super like intense. It was like these small moments that scared me in this movie. I don't even remember the Warrens being in the movie. But it was based on a book that they wrote. And what I remember being scary was a moment where somebody in the family could hear, late at night in the dark, they could hear splashing sounds coming from the bathroom upstairs. Somebody was in the bathtub. Lights out. They crawl up the stairs, go into the bathroom. Shower curtain is drawn. Water splashing around.
That's
sounds
creepy.
of the water splashing
That's
around.
Creepy.
And very sort of intrigued and kind of nervous, this person opens the shower curtain and the bathtub's empty and there's nobody there.
Yeah,
and even right now when I'm telling you this story, I have goosebumps.
That's very unsettling. That's unsettling. And I don't believe in ghosts, but like if I hear some water or anything happening, then I'm just like, maybe. I would still be terrified and run.
The other thing that happened in the movie that freaked me out, actually what I thought was very effective, was Sally Kirkland's character is doing laundry down in the basement, and I believe her mother or her mother-in-law had come to stay with them. And Sally's folding laundry. She hears her mother calling from upstairs. Sally's character's name is Janet, and I remember this. The name Janet will always haunt me because of the moment in this movie. Sally's mother-in-law's calling from upstairs, Janet, Janet. And Janet goes to the bottom of the stairs. She's looking up. She's saying, What? What, Mom? What's going on? What? Janet, Janet. Continuing to call. And she starts up the stairs. And then from like right in front of her, right behind her, this voice yells out, Janet. And she jumps and falls down the steps. Oh. And it shocked me as a kid. And I don't know, it was just very effective. And of course, like so many of the other Ed and Lorraine hauntings that they investigated, there's sort of questions of legitimacy surrounding the Smurl incident, surrounding the Perrin incident, surrounding the Annabelle doll. There's really no proof that any of these things happened, but they're really good storytellers, right? Even the idea of my friend showing me that photograph that either he bought from them or that he learned how to take from them, they are marketing geniuses.
I think their strength, at least from what I've heard, Ed specifically, his strength was a salesman. I don't know, because I've obviously only ever had half a conversation with Lorraine Warren, and it was about like chicken or whatever. But like, I don't know. But I always kind of got the impression from things I've heard about her and things I've read about her that she like genuinely believed and kind of felt like she did have this gift. But it's just, I don't think there's a single case that they had been involved in that did not have controversy and a lot, as you said, questions. And it just feels like they did so many paranormal investigations that the fact that there's not like one that was just a clean, like everyone is in agreement of what happened and what occurred and like how they either helped or didn't or got involved or didn't or the timing or whatever. It just makes me more skeptical. Even though I love them, I love the lore that comes with parts of them. Like definitely The Conjuring is such a glowing version of who they were not, but who maybe we wanted them to be. Right down with how pretty they made them look, how wholesome. And there's definitely like a darkness underneath that I feel like I felt when I met her in person. Like something didn't feel wholesome in the way that I feel like they wanted us to.
We can get into the reasons of that in a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you about Connecticut.
Yay.
And New England in general, but like Connecticut. And I know you said you don't believe in ghosts. I sort of may or may not. The older I get, the more skeptical I become. I still have memories of strange things that growing up in this place, this house in New Jersey, I cannot explain. And I guess I want to ask you, do you think that Connecticut is a particularly haunted place?
I think yes. And I love Connecticut. So like, I'm such a nerd. And when I was younger, I couldn't wait to get out of Connecticut as like every teenager or whatever. And then like, moved to another country, ended up coming back and just, I don't know, it feels haunted, even though I don't believe in ghosts. There's just, because it's old, and my husband is English and he always says like nothing in America is old, but by American standards, Connecticut's old. And I just feel like there's a lot of tormented history in places, and it just feels like I could see why people believe. Like I 100% get it, and I understand why people want to believe as well. Going back to X-Files.
Yeah. Are there any stories that you've heard, local legends of Connecticut lore that you think would be fun to share?
There's two that come right to mind, and those were the basis for the Stitchers and the Collectors.
Oh, nice.
So the Stitchers, I feel like it will kind of go spoiler, but I feel like your listeners won't care that much. I won't tell what the oldies are, but I will say there is a witch. And that is based on where I grew up, Stratford, Connecticut. Goody Bassett was a woman who, quote unquote, confessed to being a witch like 100 years or something. I'm going to get the date wrong, but something way before the Salem witch trials. So Connecticut started to go a little bit witch wild, like, oh, she's a witch. And we started, and then we were like, actually, everyone calm down. We're just calm down. And that happened before Salem. But she allegedly confessed, which, as we know, those confessions were, not real. But legend had it that they hanged her and then cut off her head and buried it separate from her body. And that it was unmarked, but there was this big rock with like a, legend has it again, like a slash across from it, that from where she used her power or something, and that it's behind the haunted library. And so as kids, we would obviously ride our bikes. Like, I don't know anyone from Stratford who did not spend part of their childhood riding their bike to the center of town, trying like hell to find that rock, trying to find the rock that had a mark on it. And, you see any rock that has a mark on it and you're like, that must be it. That's where her head is, under there. And so she's rumored to, still haunt the place in Stratford. And then The Ladies in White is what inspired The Collectors, the second book, which I think a lot of different places and towns and countries have a version of The Ladies in White, like a beautiful woman all dressed in white, kind of standing at the edge of a cemetery and trying to flag down specifically men as they're coming by. And there's a very old cemetery that I pass in Easton on my way to work every day. And that one is what the Warrens have said, where they have seen the lady in white. And so when the cover artist was doing The Collectors, I sent him a picture of that cemetery and he used that to kind of help with the cover. But
Amazing.
Those two in particular, like, I always grew up searching and, kind of wanting, almost like daring the ghosts to show themselves to me. And those are two that were very, like, a big part of my childhood.
I'm wondering, because my friend in Milford told me that the Warrens would do these meetings and train people how to hunt ghosts and take pictures of ghosts. Did you ever participate in anything like that?
I did, but not in Connecticut. I did when I was in San Diego. We were there for I think my cousin's wedding or something. So there was like a lot of us, and we went to like the old part of San Diego, like I think it's called Old Town, and we were there and we were having dinner, and my dad booked us one of those like ghost hunting sessions, because apparently that place is meant to be really haunted. And so we learned how to take pictures and do the whole thing, and he was showing us pictures, and that made me more of a skeptic than most things. And then I think what pushed me over the edge was when I saw the Warren's son-in-law do a lecture, and then I was like, I'm out. I don't know if you want to get into that now or later.
Yeah, no, now go ahead. What turned you off about the son-in-law?
Oh gosh. So I was really excited because I think I had just gotten my book deal, and I think I was working on The Collectors, something where it felt like really serendipitous timing, that like, because I knew their museum was closed in their house or whatever, and I wouldn't be able to go in there. But he was doing a lecture at a local high school, just like on a weeknight. And so my husband and I bought tickets and we went, and I was all excited, and we were in a room full of mostly, weirdo adults like us, and then a lot of high schoolers. And it was kind of similar the way it started to that presentation I had seen like decades before with Lorraine, where she was going through her little spiel about why spirits come to certain people and why they don't, and what is a haunting and what is a possession, and then showing the slideshow. It was essentially that, but a more modern version. It depressed me so much. He felt like a salesman for Catholicism. And The high school students, again, the teacher and me is like, look at these babies over there asking good questions. They like when it was question time, he would show some videos of what he said were possessions, and it looked like someone who was in like distress. It felt wrong. And I think everyone in the room kind of sucked in their breath and felt like us watching this is not right. Like, this is not what we paid for, kind of thing. It felt really wrong. And kind of sickening. And then some high school students were like, for question time, I didn't ask any questions, but they did. And they were like asking about, well, what about people who don't, like, you're saying your faith is the only way to fight evil, but like, what about people who aren't Catholic or who are atheists or who are agnostic or who are that? And he basically shut them down and basically said, like, he didn't use the words damned, but that was essentially what he was saying, was like, well, oh, well, you're out of luck then. Like, your souls are. Yeah. And then, like, when people,
good luck to you.
Exactly. That's kind of what it was. And then,
okay.
And then it was like the other questions about mental health and like, what are we actually looking at here? And he was just like, just doubled down. My husband and I both left, and we were just like, that is not what we thought it was going to be. It wasn't fun. It wasn't like even interesting. It just kind of felt sad. And there was a woman in the audience when it was question time, and she was crying. She was like, I think my daughter is being possessed. She like wakes up with bruises and this and that. And then the assistant to Tony was just like, oh, well, I'm going to get her number. We're going to help you. We're going to help your daughter. And it's just like whatever's happening there, this is not going to help it. So I kind of left feeling really sad and even more skeptical, because if these are meant to be, you know, essentially and then the daughter's not there. Like Judy, is that her name? She's Judy. Never in any of these situations that at least I have seen. Like, she was not part of the talk. She wasn't even there. She wasn't with her mom at the country club that time.
So some of the research that I did included reading stuff from the Hollywood Reporter, listening to some podcasts, including Last Podcast on the Left, which did a 3-part extremely deep dive into the history of the Warrens, which basically eviscerated them, I was telling you before we started recording. And their analysis of a lot of the Warrens' case files, accounts, was really interesting. But what they had to say about Judy and what they had looked into about Judy as a daughter was that she was basically raised by her grandmother. She didn't know what her parents even did. She thought they were landscape painters until she was maybe in her 20s and started hearing stories about what was really going on. They protected her from what they were really up to, the books that they were writing, the stories that they were concocting.
How did they explain the basement, though? Because my basement growing up had a TV and a couch. Yeah. It didn't have Annabelle.
I know in the Conjuring movie, she's part of their lives. She goes into the basement. There's a whole Judy-based movie called Annabelle Comes Home.
I haven't seen it.
And, oh my God. It's kind of my favorite one just because it's so ridiculous. It's basically the story of the haunted museum coming to life. Oh. And Judy is the one who's home with a babysitter. So Judy is a character in this Conjuring universe film series. But according to at least the fellas on Last Podcast on the Left, she didn't even live there. So that's why she wasn't aware of the basement. She was raised by her grandmother. And that's maybe also why she wasn't aware of some of the other things that were going on in the house, allegedly. I guess we say allegedly. And I guess we can talk about that now if you want. It's hard. It's strange because hearing about the Warrens as a college student and being intrigued by ghost hunting and ghosts myself as a kid and thinking, oh, these people were really doing it. I was intrigued after the first Conjuring movie came out, and I read a book that they sort of worked on. I don't remember the author's name, but they worked on it. It's called The Demonologist, which I think is telling because it's not the demonologists, it's the demonologist, but it's about both of the Warrens. That bothered me that it was about both of them, but clearly the title was focused on Ed alone. There's a story in The Demonologist, true story supposedly, about their visit once as a couple to New York City and encountering an unhoused person in an alley who...
I don't like where this is going.
No, Ed was concerned with the look on this man's face and was convinced that the man was possessed by a demon. And I'm like, first I read that and I was like, whoa, not okay. Mental illness is a real thing, and we cannot conflate that with religious, ideology. And he yelled at this guy. And of course the guy yelled back because some strangers yelling at him on the street. And Ed was like, that was just proof that he was possessed by a demon. And I was like, oh, I'm reading things now that are really not vibing with what I, first of all, heard from my friend in Milford, that are not portrayed in the film versions of these people's lives. And the guys in the last podcast from the Left series on the Warrens really sort of pointed out that they really never did anything or involved themselves in any of these sort of situations except for sort of opportunistic purposes. And that's their opinion. I'm not saying that. They supposedly never took money for any services. But
that's what I heard as well.
Yeah. But they did have big book deals. They
still profited off of these people.
9 books. Yeah. And oftentimes cut the people who they were writing about out of the financial deals. So again, I'm like, this is really problematic. Worst of all, prior to the Conjuring movie coming out, the first one, it was revealed that there's a woman named Judith Penny who made a sworn declaration. This is from the Hollywood Reporter. Sworn declaration that at age 15 in the early 1960s, she lived in the Warrens' house as Ed Warren's lover for 4 decades. He was in his 30s. She was 15.
Oh my God.
Supposedly, he was a city bus driver, and he met her on her route to school. Their attorney, this is after Ed passed away, their attorney, Gary Barkin, said the family had no knowledge of any alleged conduct between them, and the Warrens claimed for years that she was a niece and or a poor girl who was a charity case who needed a place to stay. At a certain point, the room across the hall from their bedroom, Lorraine was completely aware of all of this. The room across the hall from their bedroom was left, and they built an apartment for her somewhere else on the property. And she lived with them, allegedly, as a second wife. None of this is in any of those movies. I find that very strange and, of course, disturbing. I guess my question to you is, and I'm not sure if you're a fan of these movies, I'm not sure how you feel about these movies, but I guess my question to you is, how do we, as fans of these kinds of stories and characters, reconcile what we know of these Catholic superheroes as they are portrayed in pop culture, and especially in the Conjuring films? How do we reconcile this behavior and continue to digest these films as satisfying ghost stories, horror movies, possession narratives? Is that even possible?
I had heard about this. I listened to, I don't know if you listened to the You're Wrong About episode about the Warrens, or there was 2. It was really good. And they did get into this a bit. I also listened to, I can't remember what it's called, but there's like a movie podcast about like movies that have had like controversy or have had trouble getting made. And they talked about the Conjuring movie and how this was coming out and how it was like, there was a wild contract that they had to sign. I guess the movie producers had to sign that like said they wouldn't talk about basically anything about that in the movie. And I don't know. I did see the first Conjuring movie. I didn't think it was scary at all. I saw it before I knew about this side of them. I think I always grew up believing they were kind of charlatans, but like I didn't know about this other really problematic side. I feel like the older I get, the more I hear. And also as the times change, the more I think people are open to saying, yeah, no, that's not okay. Like, you can't do that to an unhoused person. You cannot bring a 15-year-old. Like, it's just like, I think people have been more open about the things. I honestly don't understand. I don't want to get like political. It's like supposed to be fun conversation about the Warrens, but I feel like there is a big enough population who love to see that good versus evil, but like in a biblical kind of sense, that I feel like those movies hit a weird sweet spot where it can appeal to like tweens and teens, and horror fans, and then also Christians, like very conservative Christians, because they can watch the scary thing, whereas a lot of typical horror is probably too much for them, but they can watch these movies and these franchises and like feel okay with themselves because the Christians win. But I guess I don't feel conflicted about being interested in them because I never really liked them as people, if that makes sense. Like, I kind of never, I didn't really grow up in a very religious household. So like, I'm not looking up to them as like these Christian superheroes that they are kind of being portrayed in these movies. They always were just the ghost hunters to me. And I feel like that is just interesting to me, and how they're able to capture like a whole culture still to this day. Like, how many more movies? I didn't even know there was another one coming out. Like, how many more movies are coming out? It just feels like this endless interest in them that just keeps growing.
They built that.
Yeah.
That's why I say that Ed and Lorraine, I would say as well, like they were marketing geniuses.
They found a gap in the market and they just like went for it.
and also, like I said earlier, they also cut out the people who the stories actually happened to, which, yes, marketing geniuses, but like billionaires, that is psychopathic behavior.
I was going to say villains. Yeah. Like, I remember the Lindley Street one that I was mentioning earlier when my mom was like x-raying the people from it. It was like, we're talking about a little girl. We're talking about a child who was like, I think I read that she was, she was adopted or something. And so she was just like being completely for fame and the notoriety of like the Warrens are here and they're going to save this soul. It was like they're writing books that feature this little girl who then had to be, go essentially into hiding. Like, they moved because you can't come back from something like that. And it just feels like there's never been any recourse for all of these disasters they've left along the way. In fact, it just feels like they're being rewarded for it. I will say, at that lecture where I saw Tony speak, there was desperate energy coming off of him. Like, this desperate energy as in like to hold on to this legacy. And he was complaining that certain movies that were being made based on the Warrens, I don't know, experiences, and I can't remember which ones. There was definitely one in England that he was complaining about, and how they didn't want any input from the Warren. Like, basically, the producers were like, no, we want nothing to do with you. Like, nothing. And he was really mad about that. So I don't know. I can't say if that's like certain movie producers are interested in like a grain of an idea that is loosely tied to them, because sometimes they just seem to have inserted themselves where they weren't even needed. I think that was the England one that he was kind of talking about.
Yeah, I heard that. I think that they had a very, very minimal involvement in the Enfield poltergeist thing.
That one. Yeah, that one.
It's bizarre. It's strange. These are interesting American characters.
They'd fit in right now.
Very much American characters in terms of their charisma, their
showmanship,
but sort of post Warrens and maybe post Ed Warren. I know Lorraine, sort of at the end of her life, seemed like a little sweet little old lady in the interviews that I saw and in some of the shows that she was featured in that have to do with the new generation of ghost hunters on television and pop culture. Like, would you agree that there's like a sort of a modern fascination post-millennium in terms of television, in terms of what we are consuming. I'm thinking of shows like, of course, Ghost Hunters, the classic Ghost Hunters. Paranormal State is the one that Lorraine came on as a guest sometimes. Mm-hmm. And very interesting episodes there that actually I found pretty chilling. And then Ghost Adventures. I can't remember the host of that one, but I call it the Screaming at Ghosts show. I do not like that show because it seems like maybe don't antagonize the spirits that may or may not exist in the place because you want them to answer you. I guess I'm bringing this up because there is a modern fascination with ghost hunting, and your new book, mm-hmm. The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family, has to do with ghost hunters. Mm-hmm. And a pair of kids who are ghost hunters and a mom who is very obsessed with getting the video footage so that they can get views. I'm wondering how much of that was inspired by the Warrens, how much of that was inspired by these new modern ghost hunting shows. Can you talk about this book and then maybe tell us if there's a connection there?
Yeah, there definitely is a connection. So The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family is about these twin mediums. So they are 13, they're in 7th grade. They can see and talk to ghosts, and it is their whole identity because they come from this lineage that is Warren-esque, but their grandparents were the Mannings. And so similar kind of thing, the Mannings just toured before the internet age. They toured all over the world on these very famous ghost hunts, wrote books, etc., were on TV shows. They pass away, and their lone daughter has not inherited the gift. And so she's kind of like a stage mom about it because she has this desperation to uphold the family name and the legacy. But with the invention of YouTube, yes, it's easy for her to like put her kids out there, but so can everybody else. And so there's lots of competition from, other people who have a strong brand and who are going out and doing the same thing and maybe getting more views. And so one of the twins, Gabby, wants out. She hates this life. She wants to make her own legacy. She wants to play soccer and play sports and hang out with her friends and not be known as Ghost Girl. She doesn't want to do this anymore. And Trent is a people pleaser. And so he just wants to make his mom and his sister happy. So he kind of feels torn in between both of them. And at the beginning of the book, he doesn't really know what he wants. He doesn't know if he likes ghost hunting or not because he's never really thought about it because it's never been a choice. The mom books this haunt, which was the grandparents' their last major haunt before they retired and just started doing public speaking. And it was at this old theater called the Majestic. And there is a Majestic theater that has been closed in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that's partially based on, and also the Sterling Opera House in Connecticut, which is also like an abandoned, allegedly haunted theater in Connecticut and Derby. And so the plan is to go there and film this video, and the mom thinks it's going to get a ton of views because it was the grandparents' last haunt, and there's been all kinds of speculation about what really went on that night. And Gabby decides, I'm going to do this last one, and then I'm going to work up the nerve and tell Trent and my mom that I'm out of the family business. Except when they get to the theater, they're not met with a typical ghost the way they have before. They meet a demon. And so the demon ends up possessing Gabby, and Trent has to figure out how to get his sister back. And the points of view go from Trent to Gabby to the demon, which was super fun. I never wrote from a demon's point of view before. But it is absolutely inspired by all the things that we were talking about. Well, most of the things we were talking about. And let's make that clear.
Yeah, none of the Ed.
No Ed. I've always was really interested in the Warrens' daughter and what is it like to grow up with these ghost hunting parents who are famous or infamous for doing exorcisms and going all over the world and being kind of controversial. I'm also really interested in that kind of desperation to hold on to a legacy and a name, which I saw from that lecture with Tony. And I'm also really interested in YouTube. My students are always Miss, I'll like subscribe to my YouTube. Like, no, I'm not gonna subscribe to your YouTube channel. But like, they're obsessed with views and subscribers and like having this. My 8-year-old son wants to be a YouTuber, and I'm like, "What's your channel gonna be, man?" And he's like, "Oh no!" Like, there's just this like need for recognition and fame, and there's a lot of parents who do put their kids on there, with their things, and once it's out there, you can't take it back. So what is that like to not have any control over your own reputation? So I was kind of interested in that. And I never liked those ghost adventure type shows. I've seen them, but they always just annoy me. And I'm just like, how are we 1,000 episodes in and you still not show me a ghost? Like, how? So like, It just felt, it always just like, so I don't know, like, show me, I'm a willing audience, show me something, but they never do. So they always kind of annoy me. And there's like a little tiny bit of that, because I can't remember his name, but I'm pretty sure the host of the Ghost Adventures one, I think I read when I was writing this book that he bought a museum in Las Vegas and is turned it into his own Warren-esque type haunted museum. I put like a little nod to that at the very end, like in the epilogue of Many Hauntings.
Yeah, I was wondering at the end if you were nodding towards somebody who really existed. And that's really funny to hear that the answer is yes. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a really fun book. I was intrigued by the idea of telling a story of demon possession for middle grade readers, pre-teens, teens, young teens, adults, parents, whoever wants to read this. I enjoyed it, as an adult. How did you decide to manage that without going to the places that the Conjuring movies do? Like, there's no Christianity, Catholicism angle to this, which I thought was smart.
Well, I'm not any of those things. So I didn't grow up that way. I do have family. Like, my mom did go to Catholic school, but she had such a bad experience that she kind of raised us to be pretty much, agnostic, or like there's no religion in our house. Her sister was very religious, and she has 4 kids, and they had encounters and had a priest come over and exorcise their house before.
Really?
Yeah. And what my cousin now, like one of them, she's always texting me, "Oh yeah, I'm at this film." She works in Hollywood, and she's like, "I'm at this film shoot and it's haunted." And she'll send me pictures of the haunted things. And she's like, "Oh, and a ghost is like sitting right over there." And I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, I'm still skeptical about it, but it's kind of interesting how, in this one family we have such different point of views about it. So I knew right away that I was not going to put religion in it. And that's why I didn't use the word exorcism. I used the words release and things like that. Because I was a little bit nervous. I'm waiting to start seeing reviews that like call me out or something. But
the thing is, you built a magic system ultimately. Like, let's say you built if not a magic system, because it's not a fantasy novel, but there is an element of these kids using spells or recitations or ritual to do what they have to do. Right? As psychic mediums, as kids who are trying to let go of spirits from where they're trapped. Or on the darker level, getting rid of demons, which is amazing that these kids are able to go to those dark places in this story as well. So I'm applauding you for creating a magic system that absolutely works without going to those places that you didn't want to go to.
Thank you. I could not have done it without our shared editor. Shout out to Emily DeLuga.
Emily DeLuga.
Just
amazing.
Yeah, we love Emily. Because Emily's always been so good with me of like, I'm always a little bit hesitant because I am a teacher. And I think sometimes I am a little bit worried about parent backlash, that she's like, no, make it scarier. No, make it scarier, make it scarier, make it scarier. And knowing that someone kind of is telling me how much I can push things, but knowing it's middle grade, and at the end of the day, there's going to be a happy ending. Like, it's going to end on a hopeful note. And I think maybe that's what I'm kind of hoping, like similar to how people who are very maybe Christian and who would be nervous about letting their kid read a book with a demon, in the way that The Conjuring, for all of its flaws, it does show good conquering evil. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of middle grade horror books, that's what we try to do, because you want to leave kids with hope and not feeling, like a lot of adult horror, like bleak and hopeless and nothing's going to come around.
Yeah. But just to wrap this up, I mean, I guess regardless of the truth of the Conjuring films or any of the Warrens' escapades through scary pop culture of the latter half of the 20th century, in a lot of ways, people do find them to be satisfying. And I guess what I want to ask you is, like, what's the difference between real life ghost stories, right? These real life tales that people tell, and the fictional ghost stories that reach wide audiences. These Conjuring movies have collectively made over $2 billion, right? Huge. So I guess that's sort of the entry to the question I sort of wanted to ask. But ultimately, if we can sort of tackle, like, how do we as creators make a compelling and satisfying story out of something or someone who exists in real life and who may be flawed? I guess to boil both of those questions down is, like, real life ghost stories, the Warrens being very good storytellers. I feel like what they ultimately needed to do for themselves was invent some fiction behind that to make the stories sellable. Are we as creators doing the same thing that the Warrens did? Are we as ghost storytellers using the inspirations from real life to make something more satisfying than something that maybe doesn't even have an answer to it?
I'm going to say a hard no, because we as storytellers, like you and me, like fiction writers, we are always presenting it as fiction, whereas they spent their entire career making money off of people's stories, and in some cases, like in most cases, taking a situation that might have already been bad for different reasons, like Amityville, and then making it worse, right? Like building it up and giving it an audience and then making it worse, and then just walking away and leaving the destruction in their wake. And our job as fiction writers for children is we're trying to do the opposite. Like, instead of causing destruction and walking away, like, we're trying to build empathy and hope. I get really frustrated as a teacher whenever I see that, like, genre fiction, like horror, is like not important enough, I'm using air quotes, important enough to be used in classrooms as a teaching tool, as opposed to like contemporary literature, as opposed to seeing that all things could be important. Books like middle grade horror really show kids how to be brave, or that you can be brave in these impossible type of situations and come out, defeating evil. I feel like there was so much manipulation in what they did. Even if Lorraine Warren believed in what she was doing, there is still some manipulation that she had to have been aware of, especially to put that clause in that contract for, the Conjuring movie. Like, that's intentional. And our intent is to kind of build up. So while I guess the overlap is we're both telling ghost stories that might have been inspired by maybe real things, I feel like people have always been telling ghost stories. It's like one of those things that's never going to go out of fashion. Like, right? Like, there have always existed ghost stories, monster stories. And it's mainly to help people feel, well, urban legends, right, were like made to try to keep teenagers and kids like from following the rules and going on the right track. But it's also to show us that we can be brave and that good can conquer evil. And I feel like they put the Christian spin on that and made themselves, allegedly holier than thou, even though we know that's not true. But I do feel like middle grade horror authors and just middle grade authors in general, like, we are literally trying to do the opposite. We're trying to build that empathy. So I guess the only in the Venn diagram of us and the Warrens would just be ghosts.
There's so much more I want to talk about regarding ghost hunts and all this stuff, but I think we're out of time, and I just, I can't thank you enough for being here and talking about this really weird subject, and also your new book, which is hitting shelves soon, if not already, and I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Thanks again to Lorien Lawrence. By the way, I'm not sure if you were paying attention when she said she grew up in Stratford, Connecticut. If that sounds familiar to any horror fans out there, it's because Stratford is where Stephen King grew up too. Yeah, Lorien's horror pedigree is for real. And maybe this makes the argument that Connecticut is the creepiest state. Well, besides Maine, of course. Again, please check out Lorien's latest book, The Many Hauntings of the Manning Family. It moves fast, is super unsettling, and the relationship between the sibling protagonists is heartfelt and keeps the scares grounded in palpable emotion. I really loved it. I know you and your kids will too. And if you don't mind listening for a few more seconds, I'd love if you'd check out my recent books too. Tales to Keep You Up at Night and More Tales to Keep You Up at Night are available in paperback now from Penguin Workshop. And you can also pre-order my upcoming picture book, My Brother's Butt is Haunted. In fact, I really hope you do. Pre-orders help us authors more than you might imagine. Anyway, there's an order link for all my books on my website, www.danpoblocki.com. Thanks so much in advance. If you'd like to find me online, I'm still on Instagram at danpoblocks and at Our First Fears, and on Blue Sky at danpoblocki.bsky.social. You can reach out at ourfirstfears@gmail.com. If you do want to get in touch, let me know. Do you recall the first time you felt frightened? For real. Write to me and let me know. I may just read your story on an upcoming episode, if you let me. Thanks again for your precious time. I'm Dan Poblocki, wishing you sweet dreams and pleasant nightmares.